Hey campers, I'm very pleased to introduce Malena Chastain. I first met her a couple of years ago. She was speaking at an event, I think it was in Connecticut, then again at another event. I said, we've got to get this special lady to our camp. And we brought her here in early December of last year when Reverend Kraft and I were up here for a Christmas breakfast. And Reverend Kraft said, she sounds like, you must know Chris Ann Hall, you sound just like her. So she's our Chris Ann Hall for this week, but she's a wonderful lady, and she has her own biographical sketch, so let's give her a nice warm hand.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So I want you to think about the strongest woman you know in your life. Get a good picture in your head. Now don't share that thought, because if you weren't thinking about the significant other that you came with today, it's going to be a very long ride home. My name's Malena Chastain. I've been an activist for years. I teach the Constitution on a regular basis. I ran a weekly show for about 2 years. I founded a national Patriot Women's Group, and now I'm running for state representative in the state of Massachusetts.
Come on.
That's right. My husband's an Army medic. I have 4 daughters and 3 grandsons, and I'm excited to talk to you today about the Daughters of Liberty. So we're going to go into the Daughters of Liberty, the past and the present today. So the Daughters of Liberty were women who sacrificed comfort and safety for freedom and independence. They played a large role in the revolution, a larger role than most people realize. A lot of people give a lot of credit to the Sons of Liberty, right? I'm sure all of you have heard the Sons of Liberty, but they tend to forget about the Daughters of Liberty. So let's play a little fun trivia. In the years leading up to the American Revolution, the British were imposing more and more restrictions and taxes on the American colonists. These taxes were all imposed without approval from the colonist. Which one of these taxes were imposed on the colonist? We've got Property and Land Act, the Sugar Act, or the Clothing and Textiles Act. Yes? The Sugar Act. You're absolutely correct. How about these? Livestock Act, Coffee Act, or Townshend Act? The Townshend Act. Very good. The Bread Act, the Stamp Act, or the Balloon Animal Act? The Stamp Act. Very good. So I figured all y'all were going to pick the Balloon Animal Act, but all right, I was wrong. All right, so before we get into specifics on the Daughters of Liberty, we should briefly talk about what these acts are and how they impacted the colonist. So we have the Sugar Act of 1764, also known as the American Revenue Act of 1764. So on April 5th, 1764, Parliament passed a modified version of the Sugar and Molasses Act. And this act was under the colonial merchants had been required to pay a tax of 6 pence per gallon on the importation of foreign molasses. But because of corruption, they mostly evaded the taxes and undercut the intention of the tax. The English product would be cheaper than that from the French West Indies. This hurt the British West Indies market in molasses and sugar and the market for rum, which the colonies had been producing in quantity from the cheaper French molasses. The act also listed more foreign goods to be taxed, including sugar, certain wines, coffee, pimento, cambric, and print and calico, and further regulated the exportation of lumber and iron. The enforced tax on molasses caused the almost immediate decline in the rum industry for the colonists. The situation disrupted the colonial economy by reducing the markets to which the colonies could sell and the amount of currency available to them for the purchase of British manufactured goods. This act set the stage for the revolt at the imposition of the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act of 1765 was passed by the British Parliament on March 22nd, 1765. So the new tax was imposed on all American colonists and required them to pay a tax on every piece of printed paper. Can you imagine paying tax on every piece of paper you use today? So that includes ship papers, legal documents, licenses, newspapers, other publications, and even including playing cards. So the money collected by the Stamp Act was to be used to help pay the cost of defending and protecting the American colonist right around the Appalachian Mountains. So the actual cost of the Stamp Act was pretty minimal, if you think about it. And if you think about taxes today, what we have to pay in taxes, they keep inching more taxes, but they're minimal, but then eventually they all add up. So that was the reasoning that the British gave. Well, it's a minimal tax. But the colonists were really scared about the precedent that it was going to set, the standard that it was going to set. So in the past, taxes and duties on colonial trade had always been viewed as measures to regulate commerce, not to raise money. So I just want to digress for a moment and just explain that it's so important to look at what's happening today, right? What may seem like it's a good idea today may set a precedence which could affect us negatively in the future. Case in point, we could have a Republican president that we're supporting his actions, but he could set a precedent that then a Democratic president could come in and use those standards against us. So we really need to take a lesson from the colonists that were able to understand that. So the Stamp Act was viewed as a direct attempt by England to raise money in the colonies without approval of the colonial legislatures. If this new tax were allowed to pass without resistance, the colonists reasoned that the door would be open for far more troublesome taxation in the future. And they were right to feel that way. And again, we can see this today. We allow infringements, we allow taxation without resistance, and what we see is more and more imposition on the people until now it's difficult for us to even manage or resist. So we get to the Townshend Act of 1767, and this is an act that not a lot of people know about. They know the name, but they don't actually know what was involved in it. So the Townshend Acts were a series of measures passed by the British Parliament in 1767 that taxed goods imported to the American colonies. But American colonists who had no representation in Parliament saw it as an abuse of power. The British sent troops to America to enforce the unpopular new laws, further heightening tensions between Great Britain and the American colonies in the run-up to the American Revolutionary War. The British thought the colonists should help pay the cost for their protection. The British Parliament enacted a series of taxes on the colonies for the purpose of raising revenue. Again, this really seems similar to what we're facing today. So look at how much we pay in taxes in Massachusetts alone. And when you compare Massachusetts to more southern states that are more red states, people from the South look at me like I'm crazy when I tell them how much we pay in taxes, to include state taxes. And what do we find? Our infrastructure is horrible. We can't drive on our roads without, our cars getting beat up. There is mismanagement of funds, and that's exactly what the British were doing to the colonists. So the Townshend Act, named after Charles Townshend, the Chancellor of the British Monetary Affairs, imposed duties on British china, glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea that was all imported to the colonists. Benjamin Franklin had informed the British Parliament that the colonies intended to start manufacturing their own goods rather than relying on the British. So these particular items were chosen for taxation because Townshend thought they would be difficult things for the colonists to produce. He estimated the duties would raise approximately 40,000 pounds, with most of the revenue coming from tea. So dissatisfaction and frustration was understandably growing, and the result, much like we see today, various patriot groups sprang up as a way to counteract what was seen as British tyranny. So one of the most well-known groups was the Sons of Liberty. The Sons of Liberty were kind of informal, yet powerful, and a passionate group of male colonists. They were organized, they did minor rebellion, like the Boston Tea Party, which the Daughters of Liberty also helped in. So, not wanting to be left out of the growing energy for independence and letting all the men have all the fun, women quickly formed their own counterpart to the Sons of Liberty. That was the Daughters of Liberty. So from 1765 throughout the American Revolution, the Revolutionary War, both the Sons and Daughters of Liberty rallied the public support for freedom throughout the American colonies. Neither group advocated independence or outright rebellion at the first, which is really important to understand. So they didn't want to use violence. They didn't want to use war. So today in society, one of the things that we hear all the time, if you guys are on social media, everybody's calling for war these days. Well, we just need a civil war. That's what we did in 1775. And what people tend to do is want to take us from where we are to 1775. So much has changed. It's not going to be like that. You can't romanticize the Revolutionary War. And that's not what the colonists originally wanted. So they didn't really gain traction until the 1770s. However, the passion of the Sons and Daughters of Liberty helped to set the stage for the eventual Revolutionary War. Does everybody know how hard Benjamin Franklin worked by going from the Americas to Britain and to Parliament to try to negotiate and try to prevent the colonies from going to war? It took years. So, you know, we can't say 2016 started the unrest in our republic. It started before that. It started about halfway through Obama's presidency. So in order for us to do what the colonists did and try to negotiate what we want out of government, we actually have to get active in society, active in government, active in our communities in order to start the change. But we can't create change if we don't do. So the Sons of Liberty versus Daughters of Liberty. What was the difference? Does anyone know? Well, then I'm glad I'm teaching this class. All right. So the Sons of Liberty, the men used mob rule tactics of fear, force, and intimidation. They used violence, such as tar and feathering. They stockpiled firearms, shot, and gunpowder. And they carried out the Boston Tea Party. The Daughters of Liberty boycotted imported British goods, spun to help make clothing, signed a petition promising not to drink tea. They helped plan the Boston Tea Party and helped defend their families and land during the Revolutionary War. So what did the Daughters of Liberty do? Let's watch a short video here.
The Daughters of Liberty were strong leaders who aided efforts against British.
Can you hear it?
Participated in boycotts of British goods, following the passing of the Townshend Acts. Since women often purchased consumer goods for their home, they became instrumental in upholding the boycott and ensured that women did not purchase British goods, particularly tea.
They also used their traditional skills to weave yarn and wool into homemade cloth they called homespun. This made America less dependent on British textiles. Mass spinning bees were found and organized in many colonial cities. The Daughters of Liberty did a great job advancing that cause. In January of 1770, 538 Boston women signed an agreement vowing not to drink tea as long as it was taxed. This proved their commitment to the cause of liberty and industry. They openly opposed the Tea Act of 1773 and experimented to find substitutes for tea. They made discoveries like boiled basil leaves and raspberry tea to make a tea-like drink to help lift spirits, since tea was a very large portion of their culture. In 1774, these women helped influence a decision made by the Continental Congress to boycott all British goods, which was due in large part to the Daughters of Liberty, who were determined to reach demands for homemade clothing. Although it's not often recognized, the organizations formed by women were very influential during the war.
If everybody could hear that. All right, so the Daughters of Liberty did more during the Revolutionary War than I think everybody realizes. And I'm going to try to get this as close as possible so you can hear it.
So we've heard what the Daughters of Liberty did to
guys hear
boycott,
in the back?
protest, and help plan the Boston Tea Party. But what role did they play in the Revolutionary War? They did more than you may realize. So clothing and other materials were needed for the militia. So women spun and sewed uniforms and patched uniforms that could be repaired. When militias asked for uniforms and food, homespun garments and farm crops came from the Daughters of Liberty and other patriotic women. Women also stepped forth to fill holes left by fighting Continental soldiers and perform tasks formerly reserved for their husbands, such as farming and running a business. Many men would have returned to bankruptcy after the war had it not been for the efforts of their spouses. So these newly independent women also had to stand up for themselves and their families when confronted by British soldiers. After the men went off to fight the war, American women, children, and the elderly were frequently faced with the occupation of their homes, churches, and government buildings by the British soldiers. With all the war, violence, and fighting between the French, English, Americans, and Native Americans in the past, colonial women had learned self-defense and how to use a firearm. They also grew accustomed to using axes, knives, gardening, and household tools for protection, since most firearms were being used in the war. They knew how to threaten force and even kill someone if necessary. It's also been reported that some Daughters of Liberty that did not have children or a business to run aided the militia by fighting in the war. So when they were not sewing uniforms, protecting their homes, running their businesses, tending to crops, taking care of the children and the elderly, they were also nursing the wounded. These are some pretty amazing women.
Do you guys realize that they did all that? Did you know that they had to take up arms and defend their farms and their kids while their husbands were in the militia in the Continental Army out fighting the Revolutionary War? They left the children and the women and the elderly behind. And oftentimes British soldiers would, rush into the towns and try to take over their buildings and their homes and use it for supplies and try to kick the people out to use it, if soldiers were wounded. So the women were pretty brutal. They were defending their families and their kids. Can anyone tell me a couple of women that are known in the Daughters of Liberty? Think back. Yes? Betsy Ross was a little bit later. She did a lot of the same things that the Daughters of Liberty did, but she wasn't technically a Daughter of Liberty. Yes?
Abigail Adams.
Yes, Abigail Adams. Yes.
Molly Pitcher?
Molly Pitcher. So Molly Pitcher, the name doesn't actually exist.
Oh.
So there was a woman by the name of Lynn, and she isn't really documented, but she was responsible to bring water to the soldiers, and she would use a pitcher to do that. So they gave her the title Molly Pitcher. So you'll see Molly Pitcher throughout all of history in a bunch of wars. So she's kind of like a folklore, but when you go into Revolutionary time, you will find that they do believe that there was actually a woman who was the original Molly Pitcher. So let's take a look.
Sarah is known as the mother of the Boston Tea Party, while at Abigail Adams' house, it was Sarah that formulated the plan. She helped to disguise the men and dispose of the clothing used, as well as remove the paint from the men's faces. During the Battle of Bunker Hill on June 17, 1775, Sarah organized women to nurse and tend to the wounded. Soldiers established a makeshift hospital in the open space by Wade's Tavern between the bridge and South Street. With a shortage of surgeons, Sarah removed a bullet from the cheek of one soldier and helped the woman rally to nursing duty. As the British laid siege to Boston, the Fulton used their own ships as protection and often rowed across the river to seek fuel and wood in Medford. Aware of what a shipment of wood meant for the American troops at Cambridge, Sarah sent her own husband to buy the wood, hoping that the laws regarding personal property would be respected. But this was not so. The British confiscated the wood from Mr. Fulton. Sarah pursued the British until she reached them, reportedly grabbing the oxen by the horns, turning them around, and leading them away, even as the British prepared to shoot her. She simply told them to shoot away, and the British, so astonished by her defiance, surrendered the wood to her without resistance. Sarah Franklin Bach, or Sally as they referred to her, was a leader in relief work during the American Revolutionary War and frequently served as her father's political hostess, as her mother had done before her death in 1774. Esther de Bart Reed was active in the American Revolutionary War as a civic leader for Soldiers' Relief, who formed and led the Ladies' Association of Philadelphia to provide aid for George Washington troops during the war. Deborah Sampson Gannett, better known as Deborah Sampson, or posed as Robert Sampson, was a Massachusetts woman and a Daughter of Liberty who disguised herself as a man in order to serve in the Continental Army during the American Revolutionary War. She is one of a small number of women with a documented record of military combat experience in the war. Martha Washington was a Daughter of Liberty before she was a First Lady. Martha was an activist that often rallied the women to sign protest and boycott tea. She also aided soldiers with clothing during the war. She is also the very first First Lady. Last but certainly not least, we come to Abigail Adams. She's probably one of the most famous Daughters of Liberty. Abigail Smith Adams was married to John Adams, and she wasn't just the strongest female voice in the American Revolution. She was a key political advisor to her husband and became the first lady to live in what would become the White House. One might say that both John and Abigail Adams are responsible in helping to found our republic.
So they're pretty awesome ladies.
Yeah. Amen.
And there's many, many, many more. Just didn't want the video to be an hour long for you guys. But there's thousands of women back in colonial times that were actually Daughters of Liberty. It's really impressive because during colonial time, women didn't really have a voice. It was men in politics. It was men that worked the businesses. So for them to stand up and fight so hard was really impressive. So that was a lot of education, right? How does it relate to modern day America? Well, it shows that we can stand up for what we believe in, and through unity and strength, we can create the impossible.
Yes.
Just like the colonists did. If you were this little colony, right, and you're thinking about taking on the British, England, huge. They've come and they've taken over so many different lands. They must have been very frightened. And if they have the courage to stand up and ask for what they want in their lives and what they require from government, we should be doing exactly the same thing.
Yes.
So social media shows a snapshot not only of the division in America, but it shows a snapshot of the division within our own groups, our own people. And we can't prevail until we put petty differences aside and come together with a common goal. That goal should be restoring America to its original founding.
Yes.
Passing constitutional laws, less government regulation, less constitutional infringements, aiding the working class instead of crippling them with more taxation, creating more jobs, truth, transparency, understanding that other people's feelings do not usurp my rights, and stop giving a free pass to politicians who violate the Constitution, regardless of who they are. So our elected officials work for the people, but right now it kind of seems like they've lost their way. They run their own agendas. They fight amongst each other. There are bills sitting on desks waiting to be approved. No one's signing them because they're too busy and too focused on impeachment and witch hunts and a false narrative. So if you take a step back and just listen, did anybody watch the Democrat debate? You guys were here, right? So you didn't watch it? Okay. I watched it, but I covered one eye. Just in case I lost this one, I still had this one. So the Democrats are divided, right? They're arguing amongst each other. We have the squad in Congress. We've got Nancy Pelosi and old school Democrats fighting back. We have too many parties within one party with too many different agendas. We have Democrats, we have socialists, we have far left progressives, we have liberals, we have moderate Democrats. And parties can't sustain with that many directions without a clear message. Their message isn't what we can do for the people. Their message is we must beat Trump. If I took a shot every time I heard Trump during the debates, I would be dead from alcohol poisoning. It was terrible. The other message is we must provide everything for free. We must decriminalize illegal border crossing. And to do all that, we must raise your taxes. But we're not going to tell you we're going to raise your taxes. What we're going to tell you is that it's all going to balance out in the end. And that's politician verbiage and a smokescreen. So we as Americans, as conservatives, as constitutionalists, must stand and let our voices be heard. We have to remind our elected officials that we're still here. We're not missing. We didn't go anywhere. So we can't boycott tea. And I guess some of us could make our own goods, but not all of them, especially with technology. So how do we hold government accountable? How do we change the path that we're on right now? The way we do that is to put less attention on the federal government and more attention into your local government. Your local elected officials have more control over your lives than anyone in federal ever will. They control your taxes, your laws, your regulation. People like your constitutional sheriff will stand against unconstitutional confiscations and arrests. If you start local, if you pay attention and vote the right people in, vote for constitutionalists, vote for people who care about you rather than the agenda, you can fix your community. After your community is where you want it to be, then you branch out to state, and when you're satisfied with state, you move on to federal. Now, I'm not saying that we should just throw federal elections to the wind and not vote or not care about who's the president. That's also very important. But the executive branch is very limited in power. So the people that affect you on a regular basis is your elected officials. So we have to keep an eye on what's going federally, but the circus that's going on in Washington really takes our eye off the ball. How many people here know what bills are on the table to be passed in your communities right now? How many people know how to find out what they are? Can you tell us how to find those bills?
My town at least puts them on the website. Mm-hmm. They also send out the warrant articles by mail.
Yeah, you can go to, if you have a town hall, you can go there, they'll usually put them. You can go to your state house, to the state house in Massachusetts, and see what bills are on the table. Know who your elected officials are, who your state representative is, who your city council members are, so that you can talk freely. Does everybody know? Well, Massachusetts doesn't have an elected sheriff. All other towns, all other cities, states do. Why we don't is beyond me. But get to know who your sheriff is. Get to know whether or not they're constitutional or unconstitutional. It'll make a big difference. So another thing you can do is learn the Constitution. You all are here, right, to learn the Constitution? How many know the state, your Massachusetts state constitution, as well as you do the U.S. Constitution? Because that one's very important as well. Not that it supersedes, but our state constitution coupled with our federal constitution is our armor. So we need to stop looking at government like they bestow rights on us, right? and start reminding them that our rights are God-given or given to us by birth. So they're not benefits that can be taken away. A lot of people tend to refer to them as benefits. Government loves to be in control and make us feel like we are not competent enough to run our own lives. Michelle Obama told us what to eat. She took playgrounds out of McDonald's. My kids were very upset. They don't like her very much. California has a danger tax on product that contains sugar and caffeine. A danger tax with a big warning. My body, my choice goes far beyond abortion, and I think my body, my choice should be used for other things besides abortion. I think that there are other things in regard to women's reproductive rights that don't include abortion, like tubal litigations. That's my body, my choice. If I want to have a tubal litigation because I don't want to have children, I have to get permission from a panel of doctors. I have to be over the age of 26. Or I have to already have children. What if women don't want to have kids? So that's a fight that women should be going to Congress with my body, my choice, because tubal litigation, where you tie my tubes, that is actually my body. But back to the food. I digressed. So they want to tell us what to do. If I want to eat donuts every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that's my right to do so to my body. I may not live long, but I'll die happy. Government needs to stop telling us what to do. Stop telling me what car to drive. Stop telling me what kind of house I need to live in that's energy efficient. Stop telling me what to think, and if I think differently than you, you're going to label me with one of your phobes and hateful slurs. Through regulation, we're always looking over our shoulder, asking the government, is this okay? How about this? We're so bombarded with regulation that we can't breathe, and that, my friends, is not freedom. We live in the United States of America, and we are not free. We're shackled by unconstitutional laws and regulations, all issued under the guise of safety. Benjamin Franklin said, and this is one of my favorite quotes, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." That says it all. It says it all in our current situation. But we have Americans looking to the government to regulate us so they can feel safer. They don't mind giving up liberty because they can't see the cost. But how much liberty is too much? We have 20,000 gun laws between state and federal on the books. 20,000. But we need more laws because the last 20,000 obviously isn't working. I don't know about you, but after 20,000, I don't trust that more laws are going to make a difference. Democrats keep saying that we need universal background checks. Can anybody in here that's old enough to buy a firearm raise their hand and tell me if you've been able to purchase a firearm without going through the NICS system?
You can't.
You can't.
We've had universal background checks for decades.
Has anyone been able to go to a gun show and take advantage of the gun show loophole?
There's no loophole.
No.
In Florida, so far.
Well, I was raised in Florida my whole life, and I've been going to gun shows since I was 18 years old, and I've never experienced a gun show loophole in Florida. I think that a majority of the people want to follow the laws and do what's right, and I think that if you're a criminal and you want to sell firearms illegally and you want to obtain a firearm illegally, you're going to find a way to do that.
And you're not going to go to a gun show.
No, no, because there's cameras everywhere. It's very difficult.
In Britain, when we banned handguns, crime with handguns went up 40% within the year.
Yeah.
I'm sure, because they know that people can't defend themselves.
When Brexit was passed, the British government decided that pest control on farmland was illegal, outlawed bird control, outlawed fox and rat control, and by doing so they seized tens of thousands of firearms by lawful holders and banned them from having guns, because all of the Conservative people who own land voted for Brexit, so they took all their guns away.
See? That's what happens. There's always an ulterior motive. So through massive regulations, the government the Democrats, I don't want to sound anti-government, put Band-Aids on issues, but they fail to solve problems. So there was a mass shooting in California, and I pray for all of those who were affected by this senseless crime, but California is a state with some of the strictest gun laws, and it was committed in a gun-free zone. I'm beginning to think that mass shooters don't know how to read, because if they did, they would respect gun-free zones. We need to find out a way why mass shootings happen. You know, I'm sure there's many reasons. One of the reasons, you can look at the media. Look at the liberal media. They incite people through hateful, negative labeling. They create a me against you mentality with everyone. All Trump supporters are racist, hateful bigots that are deplorable. White men are now homegrown terrorists. They're rapists. They have toxic masculinity. What do you think is going to happen when there's such hateful rhetoric coming across? There are some white men who have committed heinous acts, but there's men of all nationalities who have also committed heinous acts. All men, regardless of color or race or where they came from, are our fathers, sons, our brothers, our uncles, and our soldiers. And this war on men has got to stop. If they control the narrative, they control what the people think, and those that may be a little off are more likely to use violence, hear these things, and think that they're going out and doing some good. The California shooter said he did it because he was just mad. If we take control of our community, take control over who is elected, if we vote in the right people, if everyone did that within our own little communities, we would have a much better republic. We also need to stop voting for big names and recognizable names unless you're 100% confident that that elected official is doing exactly what you want them to do. We need to get off the cycle of voting in the big people because they have failed us. All of them have failed us. And it's time we start voting for new people, bring new people in that can start making changes. Another thing we need to do is stop barking on social media. Stop fighting with people on social media. You have to be the change you want to see. Don't tell people what you want to see. You have to be the change. You have to lead by example. You have to show others the path. Our Constitution is under attack every day. We have a presidential candidate running as a Democrat. His name is Pete Buttigieg. I'm sure everybody's heard of Pete. He says he wants to amend the Constitution. He just wants to amend it because he doesn't agree with what's happening in society. We are only as strong as our friends, our families, our neighbors, and our community. And it's time we come together with our message. Our founders did it. Our Daughters of Liberty did it. Our militia and Continental Army did it. Our Sons of Liberty did it. I wouldn't recommend tar and feathering people. That would be a big no-no. But they stood for what they believed in. But they had had enough, and they stood. And look at the beauty of what they created. Look at what we have because they had the courage to stand and say this isn't right. So in the beginning and for many years, they resisted, they spoke and acted, created the change they wanted to see. And by not stepping up now, we're not only letting ourselves down, our future generations down, but we're letting them down as well for everything they sacrificed to get us to the position that we're in. So defend our Constitution, defend our American values, stand up against unconstitutional laws. And sometimes we tend to look at unconstitutional laws and say, well, I'm not going to go to the State House and oppose that because that's not going to affect me in my life. I hear a lot of people say that. And what I tell them is, how is it that you are so special that you don't care about how that unconstitutional law is going to affect everyone else? So if it's unconstitutional, we all need to take a stand against it, whether you think it's going to affect your life or not. Another thing you can do, yes?
No. When you take public office in the United States, you swear to uphold the Constitution. But if then you start bringing in laws that violate it, isn't that breach of power in public office?
It absolutely is.
And why aren't they just dismissed? Any member of the public can charge them and say, you breached your power in public office, you violated your own office, under the Constitution, you're out, you're done. Because you could get rid of AOC, you could get rid of all of them. overnight. Because what they've said,
Yep.
what they're promoting, is a direct violation of the United States Constitution, which they swore to uphold from day one. If they go against it so publicly, they lose their job.
There's two issues. Issue number one is that not enough people stand up
Right.
Yep.
Right.
and get together.
It only takes one in the UK.
It does, but we have a two-tier justice system. And in the United States, unfortunately, our politicians are protected beyond belief. There is a path, and that can be another class. There is absolutely a path to take to remove politicians. There's even a path that Americans can take to file discovery and bring charges against Hillary Clinton. Did you know that? Our founders set up this glorious system for us. So Hal, maybe we can do an online class on that one, because I think that one's important. The other thing that you can do is run for office. We have so many young people here. Think about politics. Run for office and create the change that you want to see in your generation. So, and I just want to congratulate all of you for being here at Camp Constitution, because you are taking the first step into learning and to doing, and that's fantastic. So I started out with Daughters of Liberty of the past. Hal, I've got like a 3-minute video on Daughters of Liberty. So this is going to be Daughters of Liberty of the present. That is the national foundation that I created. It's a patriot group for women. We are very similar to the feminist movement. We just have a different path. We're not feminist. We support our men. We support firearms. We train. We don't go to women's marches and wear anything pink in our heads or dress as anything funny. We have a little bit more respect for ourselves. But just take a look. I did this video briefly for you guys, just to see a little bit about what we're about. All right.
Very good.
I'm so glad you guys allowed me to spend an hour with you today. I'm honored and blessed to be able to be here to be with you guys. So I'll be around for just a little bit. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
All right, folks,